Hi, I am Sara Marks. I am the author of Romancing Mr. Tilney, which is book 7 in the 21st Century Austen series. Today, we're going to do my annotations and commentary about the book, the chapters, the characters, all of that. Many of you know that this was not the book I planned to write as book 7. This wasn't even the plot I have been planning on using for the second Northanger Abbey modernization. I Still Love You citation needed, the one that was planned for book 7, needed more time and work before I was ready to share it with people, even my editor. I was still trying to find the right everything. Northanger Abbey, the book this was inspired by, is rarely the most popular Austen book. It's barely a romance. Sure, Catherine has a crush, and Henry seems to reciprocate her feelings, but it's nipped in the bud before it can become more than a flirtation. It feels like an afterthought when he shows up at the end of the book, ready to marry her. There wasn't enough to get us there. My friend Christy had the original idea to connect this Northanger Abbey and a modernization of it to haunting investigations, and it was a good idea. The connection back to Catherine's obsession with Gothic romance felt right. I just couldn't find the romance in that story. I kept feeling like the romance was still an afterthought, like in the original. I still have plans to do something with that plot idea. It's not going anywhere. It just won't be in this series. In fact, there are still remnants of it in other books because I was trying to build up to it. I knew 3 things before this specific idea came to me. 1, I wanted to connect this back to Love from Northanger Park's Katie. This is because all the other books in the back half of this series are connected to the front half counterpart. So, Love in Warren Woodhouse Hall is directly connected to Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse. Sweeten Up Ginny Darcy is directly connected to Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging, and so on. 2, I specifically wanted to focus on Hannah because she did so much work to get Ethan and Katie together. I knew she was jaded about her own romantic life. I wanted to have some fun with that. I wanted her to have her happily ever after. 3rd, I wanted this to be a gender swap of Northanger Abbey. I love this approach to seeing how that feels for each heroine when she's what our male counterpart was. It worked really well for Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging to sweeten up Ginny Darcy. Ginny is our Darcy in that one. It's not so much in Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse, but it does come to play in I Still Love You citation needed. And it's not easy. I'm going to be honest. You can't just gender swap them. You have to shift some things about them. This will be a bigger issue when we talk about I Still Love You citation needed whenever I get to release that, based on when you're reading, not from my lack of planning. I have 2 Austen modernizations that I love that featured an element of reality television. One was Eligible by Curtis Sittenfeld. She has Bingley as a star of a reality dating show. That's why they were also very protective of women coming in and taking advantage of him. It was a smart use of the modern Bingley. The second was Dating Mr. Darcy by Kate O'Keefe, which was not as popular as Curtis's, but in that one, and I will link to both of them in the description of the video below. It will be Amazon associate sort of affiliate links, just to FYI. But Dating Mr. Darcy is also an Austen-inspired reality show. It's less of an Austen plot and more for people who love Mr. Darcy and romance books. So if you watched like early aughts dating shows, there was like Marry a Millionaire, and it was just this random dude that they pretended was a millionaire. Or there was one like Date Prince Harry, and it was just a guy who looked like Prince Harry. It was kind of one of those dating shows, but around a Mr. Darcy figure. Well, as I read both of those, I realized the way Curtis Sittenfeld handled it as after the fact really worked with Pride and Prejudice. And while I loved Dating Mr. Darcy, it wasn't Pride and Prejudice set around a dating show. I didn't really think that would work. So when Kate O'Keefe made it just an Austen-inspired dating show, I think that was the best way to handle it. But Northanger Abbey works really well for a reality dating show. I think you'll see how the plot points line up really well as we go. But as soon as I read Curtis, when I read Curtis Sittenfeld's Eligible, I was still new to modernizing Austen. I was still trying to see what others wrote and find inspiration in it. And failing, at least with Curtis, because her book was just amazingly well done. But Dating Mr. Darcy, I was like, oh, here's what I would do differently. And I do Northanger Abbey. So no negativity to Kate O'Keefe. I loved Dating Mr. Darcy. I just had my own idea because of her. Let's get into the chapters. Chapter 1. I always think about where I want to start the story. I love stories that drop me right into the action, and I think I've gotten better about doing that as a writer over the course of this series. I think back to Modern Persuasion, and at that point, I really wanted to stay true to Austen's original and that opening. And I don't know if it's the strongest of openings, but it doesn't drop us right. It drops us into Anne's story. It doesn't drop us into Frederick and Anne's story. I mean, not Anne, Emma. Oh, I have already forgotten my own characters. So I think I've gotten better at dropping us into the action of a book, but this one really needed to start as Hannah was meeting the various men. We don't meet Oscar first. We meet our main romantic antagonist, Hank, and he is going to feel over the top because I researched this book by watching seasons of The Bachelorette. Dating reality shows aren't really my reality preference, so I focused on the stories that were being told for each man. Who was getting the winners at it? What was set up as a problem? Who's going to get the next season? These are questions I quickly learned you have to think about when you're watching reality dating shows. And I'm going to be honest, and I'll probably talk about this again later. I have my own guilty pleasure dating reality shows. They're just the trashiest of them. And I have since ceased watching them, mostly because I don't have access to those networks and they stopped those shows. It was Flavor of Love and all these subsequent spin-offs of that. Not the Rock of Love one with the guy from Poison. Was it Poison or Motley Crue or one of the two? And I didn't watch that one, mostly because he wasn't a caricature. Like Flavor Flav is a performance that is quite clearly a performance. So leaning into the dating reality show just was fun for me. But that's not the point. There were questions you had to ask. There were things you needed to know that I quickly learned in my research were still questions. The winners at it, the problem, and who's going to get the next season. There's always someone the producers like. Usually it's someone who brings enough chaos to hook the viewers, but doesn't disrupt anything for the possible winner. Eventually this person will be sent home, but they will likely be kept a little longer than the Bachelor or Bachelorette wants them there, because this maintains drama. They will bring it. Always. There may be many of these contestants, just so they have variety, but there will be a fan favorite. There will always be a fan favorite. And by favorite, I mean the one we love to talk about, also the one we want to win. And it's not necessarily the same person. In a normal season, Hank may have been one of those men. The chaos happening was part of his change in story, based on what we learn has happened, that two people, a bachelor and the Bachelorette in this case, have been kicked off the show. So the planned outcome has to shift. And granted, there's not necessarily an intended outcome. There's multiple options, but this is not unscripted. This is not reality television, really. There is some scripting, there is some story massaging, and generally they work with what they have. But what happens when one of your bachelors and your main bachelorette get kicked off at the last minute? You scramble. And we can't blame people for doing that. I did have fun thinking of ways the men might arrive to meet Hannah, and this is a staple of the Bachelor, Bachelorette series of shows. They introduce one character at a time, and some in the most outrageous ways. There were some that were really creative for the season I watched. One guy rolled in as if he was a tray of room service food. So the Bachelorette pulled off the cloche covering the cake, the plate, and that's where his head was. Why? Because she's a nurse. But his family owned a pizza restaurant. I mean, seriously. Seriously, it was sublime. Chapter 2. Yes, sofa sexuals are a thing. If you get on the feminist relationship side of TikTok, which I clearly ended up on at some point in time, they have code names for all the toxic men. And sofa sexuals, you know what this is. It's the guy who moves in with you, like, instantaneously. He's ready to move in now because he needs a new place to sleep. He doesn't have a house. He sleeps on people's couches. He needs another bed. Those of us with longer dating histories, like me, know these people. I mostly dated them in my 20s. They crash on couches, they aren't on a lease to any apartment that they're living in, or they move in with their partner really quickly so that they have a place to live. They need a bed, a roof over their heads, and some place to call home. And you'll do because you're the responsible type. Hannah knows all the types of men you can date because she hasn't found her perfect partner, so she's dating all of these men. While I might not like traditional reality shows, as I said, I do like the dumpster fire ones, the ones that centered around the D-list celebrities, so Flavor of Love, Rock of Love, and the trashier the better. Even these had a group meet and greet. There was always so much to share, but I realized that this is all from Hannah's point of view. I write from a single first-person narrator point of view. That's where I'm most comfortable. So Hannah's gets to meet the man, but she doesn't get to know she doesn't go to the meet and greet after everyone arrives. So they arrive, they meet her, they give her whatever gift they want to give her, or they do whatever this performance is that they're going to do. They shake her hand, they kiss her, they woo her, and then they're sent off. So the next guy arrives, and they're in a big room, and there's always alcohol. There's always alcohol. Was there a fight? Yep. Was somebody getting drunk while they waited? All of them, unless they're sober. How do these men spend their time when our bachelorette is not around? We learn a little as we go, but we don't really get to see it because Hannah doesn't get to see it. Would you be interested in a short story about that or a spin-off? No, I am not writing a spin-off just of the men in that room at that point. But we don't see it because she doesn't see it. Chapter 3. Okay, if you have 2 hours to meet 30 men, you're not going to meet them all. Nor do we, the reader, need to. When I researched these shows, there are a lot of stories about the men who were originally there just to be eliminated. Not only do we not need to meet them, but neither does Hannah. Originally, I was just going to focus on Hank and Oscar. But then Lee kept getting dates, and Peter made it farther than I expected. There were other contestants I had identified as possible side characters, but these 4 men were the ones that really stood out for me. I knew they needed some one-on-one time with Hannah, especially as her preference became clearer. If Hank is your type of guy, I'm happy there's someone for him because it's not Hannah or me. The final line of the chapter, I believe this is the game, has been in the book since the first outline. I think it was the line that most of the book took shape around. Hannah wants to tell a story that she thinks makes sense. She knows who she is and her strengths as a storyteller. She crafts story for social media. It sets up what's going to happen between her and Liza. Chapter 4. I didn't have to try hard to get Katie into this book. It was interesting to write her from a different point of view. She looks far more confident and grounded through Hannah's eyes instead of Ethan or her own. Ethan loves her, but she is chaos, at least for some people. this entire situation does play to Katie's strengths at the same time. If you recall, Katie is amazing at analyzing risk when she makes a decision, especially when it isn't her personal life. This is the chapter that, when I wrote it, I realized this book wasn't going to pass the Bechdel test. I can link to the Wikipedia entry about that in the info below. But there's 3 criteria to pass the test. And this came from Alison Bechdel is an American cartoonist who I will link to this. But the comic that it came out of, the graphic novel that it came out of, was essentially 2 women walking out of the movie theater and having a conversation about the movies that they watch. And thus, they sort of came up with criteria. It's not a quality criteria, but this is what the 3 criteria are for a movie or a piece of media to pass the Bechdel test. There must be more than one woman. How many movies have you watched in love with one woman? Star Wars. Essentially, one woman. It's just Leia. Lord of the Rings. It depends on your scene. But do Arwen, Galadriel, or Eowyn ever speak? This is not a sign of quality. This is just a thoughtfulness to the women of the world. These are often stories centering men and their stories. So, is there more than one woman? Check. This one has more than one woman. This has Katie, Hannah, and Liza. They must have a conversation with each other. That happens. That happens all the time through this. Liza and Hannah are constantly at war with each other. Katie and Hannah are constantly trying to just make it through this. Katie and Liza have their own little weird dynamic. So, yes, they do have a conversation. This is where this book fails the Bechdel test. They must talk about something other than men. Yikes. This entire story is women talking about men because of the nature of the story. And I remember writing this and realizing that the epiphany, my friend Rona was with me when I had the epiphany. Every other book in this series passes the Bechdel test. I don't even try. I don't even make an effort. I just let women talk to each other. Every woman I have ever written talks to other women about things beyond men. Emma talks to women about books and publishing, and her father. But I guess technically that is a man. Oh, and the art collection. Elizabeth talks to Charlotte about their future. Jane about the sorority house and Mrs. C and all of that. I mean, granted, Amelia talks a lot about men, but she also talks to women. She and Jenna have a whole conversation about candy in the car. And then there's a bonus story in a little more Woodhouse Hall where they continue talking about candy. Like, they had this long-ass conversation about candy. I loved writing every moment of it. They talk about yarn and college. Katie and Hannah in Love from Northanger Parks. Katie talk about theme parks and work. Carrie talks to everyone about everything. This woman's brain's constantly going. Ginny and Haley talk about candy making. In this book, there's nothing else to talk about. They're on a dating reality show. Even when they talk about the show, they're talking about men. So I realized this while I was working at my writing studio with my friend Rona, who is there working on her own stuff. Hi, Rona, if you're listening to this. I joked, oh my God, it's not going to pass. But my heart broke a little because I love when my books pass the Bechdel test. It's not a quality sign. Again, it's just my thoughtfulness that women exist outside of the bubble of men. And we're often, not only do men center themselves in the story, and so we are just side characters, and we can go on about this for days, and the fridging issue, that one woman's tragedy and trauma becomes motivation for a man's change arc, up to and including her death. But to have, when women center women's stories, sometimes this is, especially in romance and courtship stories, this is still sort of the center of that story is the man, the partner. So I take a lot of pride in making sure my women talk about their passions beyond the men. So my heart broke. I didn't think it was a sign of quality. I think this book is actually one of my better books. But it was Rona who reminded me it was okay. It's going to be fine. Everything's fine. It's fine. No, it's not fine. It's never fine. But we live because the story is so much fun and I love Oscar. It was worth it. Chapter 5. One scene I really wanted to have was something that allowed the readers to see how well Hannah and Oscar work together. I knew sailing was a great chance to showcase good communication and cooperation, but I know zero about sailing. I have been sailing. I know nothing about it. I just sit on the boat and enjoy food and the ocean. It's been decades also since I went sailing myself, but I remember it being difficult. It looks complicated when you know nothing. I also knew that it could be very easy for them to get away from other people on a date that's sailing. There's only so much room for so many people on a 45-foot boat. I wanted to give Hannah a chance to relax and let down her guard so that she could get to know Oscar. She might not have been taking the show seriously for her own love life. She's thinking she's concocting a story that will entertain, but this date with Oscar changes this. In a typical romance book, this would be the forced proximity a couple needs to turn the corner and for tension to pay off, but I like slower, longer, simmering romances for this series. Kissing was the break in tension. The Christmas morning story came from some conversations happening on social media as I was writing the book. One way I like to find examples of poor relationships is through the stories I find on social media, especially the Am I the Asshole stories on Reddit. People are sometimes completely unaware that they're the assholes in the situation. I know, because I'm often the asshole in many, many situations. But this story was heartbreaking, and there was a small movement, especially in feminist TikTok spaces, as a result of it. The woman telling the story was upset because her stocking was empty on Christmas morning. And many people turned around and commiserated with her. They had that too. I had no idea this happened because I don't celebrate Christmas. But I talked with a few friends and they confirmed this can be a problem. When the woman centers herself as the provider of gifts and the manager of the holiday, who remembers to take care of her? Somebody has to remember to take care of her. Sometimes she just does it herself. There's a flip side to this happening in another book. Don't worry. If you read Love from Northanger Park's Katie, you know Senior enough to expect that he would, in fact, forget his wife's stocking. The opposite of this is going to happen in the Crafters of the Cock series. If that is out yet. Yes, I do include my friends' books in mine when necessary. Pay it forward. If you're on Patreon, Elena Markham's links, but I will link to one of her books in the description below. She's mentioned in this chapter, and she has a Fable Notch. She writes much spicier than I do, but the Fable Notch series has like 9 books. It's contemporary romance with heart but heat, and she writes in a small New Hampshire town. That's the story, is a small New Hampshire town. Fable Notch. So, I'll link to that below. Chapter 6. My research in dating reality shows made something clear. Drama is what drives decision making. It can only go to a certain point, but there is a plan for the show. It's not a script. Some people are cast specifically to go home early, to flesh out the numbers. They're filler and buy other people time to get to know each other. So what happens when the filler character becomes a serious contender? That's the question for this book. The Oscar is the filler who becomes a serious contender. There are certain people who will get longer than they deserve on any reality show, the ones who create drama. I say they don't deserve it, but maybe they do. I like to watch cooking competition reality, and you can tell who's lingering because the producers like the tension they create. Not just with the other contestants, but sometimes with your host, sometimes with the viewers. If there's ever been a contestant you wanted sent home, but seems to make it week after week, that's who I'm talking about. Dating shows can be trickier, though. They create drama with other contestants, but once you piss off the bachelor or bachelorette, you're sometimes sent home. No one can stop it. The producers do everything they can to make the drama happen easily. There's an abundance of alcohol. The men are left alone together if they're not out with the bachelorette. And they don't have anything to do. And especially when you're dealing with dating shows where people have a vested interest or have to pretend they have a vested interest, it can be kind of crummy to think about the person you want to be with on a date with another person, or knowing you didn't get the date and you need it to stay on the show. So, you're bored and intoxicated. The producers just have to ask the right questions in those one-on-one interviews to make the contestants angry or suspicious, and Liza has a plan, and Hannah is ruining it by connecting with one of the filler contestants, and someone who refuses to create any drama at that. They can't use Oscar from Liza's point of view. He doesn't create drama. I suspected at this point you would dislike Hank, but our real villain is Liza. Hank's just an idiot. Or at least from my perspective, he's an idiot. If you love Hank, more power to you. Chapter 7. Peter. Sweet Peter. He was a last-minute addition. I had him at the end of the book, in one of the first drafts, and I realized, and he was just there to round out the final episode because there was going to be a blow-up. But I realized you needed a bit more time with him, especially with the way the book plays out. He couldn't come out of nowhere. He was easygoing enough to understand he didn't have a chance with Hannah, and he didn't care. It allowed him to be honest. Adding in a scene, and this scene specifically, gave me the chance to show how disjointed these dates can be. Again, there may not be a script, but there's a plan. Even the carnival games speak to the utter boredom of the dates that seem to be consistent across this research I did. The whole show is a game. Hannah knows it. She's playing it. She thought she might be a passive player, but she's realizing that she has far more control than she understood initially. And, I mean, she's not a reality show watcher, so she might not understand how this is played. She just knows it's a game. Asking Hank what he likes to read came up again and again, and it's something I saw around social media when I was writing this. This is a much longer story, but a man said and did something stupid online. At the end, no. What happened wasn't related to the books on his bookcase, but this is what triggered the commentary about him. We were all looking at his bookcase as he tried to defend the stupidity, the apology that's not an apology. As I watched the videos, I realized that for all of us, there are books that are red flags. That if the person you're with says they like this book, for you, like the red flags wave and the bells and the whistles and the red lights flash. It's not the same books for all of us. They're not bad books. They're classics. Some of them are the most popular books of all time. What I mean is that they say something about the people who love them, and that's a problem for you. So let's take Catcher in the Rye, a beloved classic. I know so many men who loved this book. It's amazingly written. It's a powerful snapshot of grief, coming of age, life in the 1950s. I love Catcher on the Rye, in a way. But if I'm on a date, and a man is telling me this is his favorite, it waves some red flags in the back of my mind. And this doesn't necessarily do the same for you. But here's why, for me. 3 assassins in the 1980s claimed it motivated them to attempt or successfully kill a public figure. Then, there were those who see themselves in Holden, even as adults. He has a me against the world mentality. I might not write the man off, but I'm definitely I'm not going to delve too much deeper. It's a flag to be cautious. What if the man doesn't read? For me, that is the biggest red flag. A hard pass. I'm not going to date a man who doesn't read. So Hank would be out. And I felt that Many women readers would also feel the same about Hank if he didn't like to read. Chapter 8. We're only halfway through the book and the Hannah-Oscar hookup is happening? Yeah, hear me out. Go back to the original Northanger Abbey and my frustrations with it. The romance is an afterthought. This is true for everything I feel about this book when I modernized Love from Northanger Park's Katie. Catherine in the original is sent home at the end of her story. Then Henry just shows up to proclaim his love. We have no idea what happened because we're reading from Catherine's point of view. Hannah is our Henry in this book. She is, even though Oscar's last name is Tilney, Hannah is the Tilney character. We get to find out what happened. Why do we go from, and what happens is the end of Oscar's story. So what happened from when Catherine left to when Henry arrives? In the original, there's no more than I have interpreted as no more than flirtation between Henry Tilney and Catherine Morland. I don't think Catherine was wrong to read his flirtations as the start of something more. Just like Katie was right to read Ethan's flirtations in Love from Northanger Park's Katie. They were something more. She just didn't understand why it wasn't progressing. Oscar isn't wrong either. There's something more here. The question is, what does Oscar do to get sent away? How could a couple get past that? We'll talk about that in the next chapter. But if there were sex scenes in my books, in these books specifically, this is one that would have happened right here. This would have turned into a sex scene if I was in the mood to write them and this series had them regularly. I was tempted to send them to another room and close the door, but I knew it would be too much to make sense of what's about to. Like, if they had done that and then what's going to happen, it's too much. They couldn't have slept together. So chapter 9. On the season of Bachelorette that I watched, there's a point made about the men posturing for each other and ignoring the Bachelorette during their entire group date. Men love a peacock. We are all on the same page. We all know that peacocks, the peacock, the beautiful feathers, those are the men in that species of birds. The women, nowhere near as beautiful. We have gotten away from the men peacocking physically, but they peacock. They just kick each other's butts, and they think it's attractive. I guess some women find it attractive. Anyway, in this show, they were ignoring the Bachelorette to peacock for each other instead of for her. So of course she gets irritated at being ignored on her own date, and the one who pays attention to her during that episode is the one who keeps standing out to the viewers. He did not win in the end. Something happened. Something happened later that caused a problem, but he was a front runner and the viewers knew it. This was the perfect setup for the conflicting messages that Hannah's getting about Oscar, because I wanted this to happen to Hannah and Oscar. On one hand, Lee has warned her about Oscar. On the other hand, she knows what she's feeling. The other men are peacocking for the camera and each other, but Oscar's right there chatting with her about books. And I'll link to Lisa Bouchard's witchy cozy mystery books in the comments below. I have a lot of books to share with you in this commentary. I was inspired by other people for a bunch of things moving forward. Anyway, chapter 10. Okay, let's talk about Oscar's departure. One of my pet peeves, and I've talked about this in other commentaries, is the number of things that can be solved in a romance book if two people just sat down and had a fucking conversation. Simple conversation. But communication and conversations are difficult. They make us feel weird, that we don't want to feel that. But if you ask a simple question and it can solve everything, then the book's conflict is bullshit. And I'm going to say this every time. This is why I don't watch Hallmark holiday movies, because every conflict in there could be solved with someone walking up to each other and say, I heard this out of context. Please make me understand. Honestly. Could all of Oscar and Hannah's problems have been solved with a simple conversation? Yes! For fuck's sake, yes! And Liza knows if she allowed Hannah to confront Oscar, then the bullshit would be clear. You, the reader, should know this is bullshit. The next question is, why didn't Oscar fight to stay on the show? We'll get there. And if you've read the whole book, you already know. The struggle for Hannah is that they have evidence of Oscar being an asshole, and Katie found it. Hannah, trusts Katie more than anyone else around her at the moment. They are best friends. Katie is upset and saw Oscar's removal, so it makes Hannah accept what's happened. Just the right amount of doubt has been seeded for her to question everything. It doesn't mean Hannah's going to give up or accept this. For one glorious moment, she does what we've wanted her to do since he strutted to meet her. She kicks Hank off. With almost every reality show, getting kicked off doesn't mean you get to go home. Actually, I'd argue that pretty much every reality show, you get kicked off, you don't go home. Especially if it's a season long, same characters, same actors kind of thing. You can't risk them going home. The producers can't risk them going home and talking to people or others guessing based on timing that they were kicked off. You keep everybody in a secondary location for the duration of the recording. I want to write a story about this, but some cooking reality shows might use your continued presence to have a secondary competition that allows you to come back into the season. A Top Chef does this. Some of those have been the greatest moments in Top Chef. Side conversation, Top Chef. I loved Top Chef Boston. And then I can't remember what season this one. So the reason I love Boston is because at the very first episode, sometimes you lose on cooking shows because your food sucks. And sometimes you lose because of the nature of the competition. And the first guy who gets kicked off after the very first cooking challenge, he's sent home. The timing of everybody else completing their task ruined his chance of ever finishing on time. So they finish last. He goes home because he was the one who, caused them to lose. He was the one who didn't finish the task. He comes back at the third to last episode because he won the secondary cooking competition that's happening behind the scenes with some of them while the main show is going on. The same thing happened in the season. The winner ended up being someone who was sent home during the restaurant war competition because she managed the restaurant poorly, but she was the best chef. So she came back and then won the show. So you can see I watch a lot of cooking competition shows, but this is something that I was like, I know this exists already. The point is, Oscar isn't gone, but neither is Hank. In my early outline for the book, I was tempted to have Hannah go look for Oscar, but I knew that couldn't happen. That's not how this story plays out. Liza has to get Hannah out of town as quickly as she can to prevent her from finding Oscar, because Liza's only goal is to prevent the two of them from having a simple conversation that could clear up everything. So yeah, Hank's back on the show after less than 24 hours. And I have a short story about that. I don't know if it's ever gonna make it. Chapter 12. Of course, Senior and Carter would like Lee. Both Senior and Carter are the same guy, let's be honest. Though I do have a redemption arc for Carter. But Lee and Carter are travel bros. So what's a travel bro? Here's another one of those concepts for a rather old idea. These are the men who prioritize traveling around the world over spending time with the people who love them. They're quick to hop on a plane, train, bus, car, just to get someone new. Kerouac, the king of travel bros. Back to those red flag books. On the Road is one of mine. Because travel bros love it. Love. Capital L, capital O, capital V, capital E. Love it. And I live around where Kerouac grew up. So I hear about Kerouac a lot, and I hear from men who love Kerouac. That's why they're here. In reality, the guy's barely around because he's off on yet another adventure. He's always framed himself as searching for his story to tell. That was the first and last time I would date a Kerouac fan. To be fair and clear, On the Road is an amazing book about assholes. It's beautifully written, and Neil Cassidy is a shithead. I don't like it. Not really. If I had to pick my favorite Kerouac, it's Visions of Gerard, because it's about Kerouac's acid trip that he took to recover memories of an older brother who died when Jack was an infant. The brother was also barely a toddler, or not yet, or just past toddler. But Jack was an infant. It is a truly beautifully written and tragedy that the event itself reshaped Kerouac's entire family. And so his search for his memories to just pull those forward into his mind is lovely. I just don't like On the Road. You can like Kerouac, just living on the road says so much about what you prioritize for me. Chapter 13. Getting to see the contestants' home and where they came from is a staple for reality dating shows. Even my trashy favorite, Flavor of Love, went home to the contestants' somethings. Maybe not the ones that are just about the hooking up and the having flings. The ones that are trying to sell you a happily-ish ever after will always let everyone see the home base for the final contestants. Why not show Peter? Like I mentioned earlier, he was only inserted to give a third finalist. I didn't want to write a whole third meet and greet with the parents. We didn't need to see those 3 dates. What was happening at this point was we needed to see Hannah making her decision about who is the winner. She's feeling defeated about Hank's return. We need to see how the men and the actual finalists know they're not really there to find love with her. We've gotten very little from them. Chapter 14. Hank's mother is your traditional wife. Not traditional, like she is a traditional housewife. I thought about making her more of a boy's mom. Those are the women who make the son the center of their entire world, even after he's moved out and started his own family. There's issues. They're the ones who push their own daughter-in-laws around when given a chance, or try to push them out. I have dated men with those mothers. Usually the guy isn't the problem. Sometimes he is also the problem. But primarily it's his mother. And depending on the relationship dynamic you have with your partner, his mother can quickly overrule him. Also, Hank can't even remember that he's already gone horseback riding with Hannah. I mean, seriously, dude. Chapter 15. Vera wasn't supposed to be a major character. In fact, the clue interfering with the show is a big problem in reality television. People get fired for getting involved. I think there are a few problems on The Real World back in its heyday. Those are the ones I remember the most. The ones where cast members hooked up with producers and producers getting fired for it. In the original draft, I didn't even name Vera. But as we got to the end, I knew readers would want to know her, and having her be present through all of this would help readers understand just how much she saw. Even then, she's measured about what she tells Hannah. She can't influence decision if she wants to keep her job. She probably struggled to keep her mouth shut. At least I would have. So where did the idea for the Hank Oscar journal come from? It's one of those things that happened on the Bachelorette season I watched. One guy got sent home the very first night because he brought his notebook about how he was going to win, his plans to win. It was discovered by the Bachelorette's besties. I don't really understand the dynamic of the relationship. I think they were just two past contestants that she got along with. But they were sent from room to room to scope out what they could about the guys. And they found this notebook. And he was confronted and then sent home. It wasn't, he was just, in his words, trying to create, and I know how these brains work because I have one of these brains. We sit down and we lay out our plan, and this is how we're going to go. And obviously, the world's going to bend to our will. It wasn't necessarily nefarious, but it was the red flag that contestant needed. So she sent him home. And I knew that this was going to be the key. And if you remember, the first few chapters, Hank accuses Hannah of being a snob right away. If you remembered that as you were reading, you probably knew that this was Hank's journal all along. They weren't burned into Hannah's brain, these words, the way the journal was. Thinking the journal belonged to Oscar was like a slap in the face after how he had been behaving towards her when they were together. It made so much more sense for her that Hank wrote it all. Of course Hank wrote this. This was not Oscar. But of course she wasn't allowed the chance to talk to him. She was scooted out of town as soon as they could get her out. So Hannah knows to whom she should direct her anger. And it's not Hank. Yes, he's an asshole. But they're clearly not compatible. He's not the one making the decisions here. Liza is the villain. I am sure if Hank could have walked away, he would have. Also, let's talk about Cole Northanger. Yes, he is part of my fantasy universe that's under a completely different pen name. But there's a short story and a little more Northanger Parks about him. He's complicated, like the kids of celebrities who have never had to work for anything and have no idea what to do with their lives, so they model or follow their parents' footsteps. We're seeing Cole after he'd started figuring out his life. I may have more to share about him, but I can't share too much because it'll spoil other things on the off chance that you might actually read the fantasy series that's on another pen name. I'll link to that below. Chapter 16. The reunion show is always a fun episode. We get to learn the little details that are safe for TV, but feel like they're sharing secrets. First, we needed to go back to the end of the show and learn what was going on. I loved bringing Ethan back. He was able to see the problems because he was well outside of the entire situation. He was not rescuing his sister, but he is rescuing the show and maybe his wife. Because at this point, Katie and Ethan are married. So the other reason, the main reason and only reason Oscar didn't fight about being kicked off, what was it? Because he knew the truth. It's a reality show. It would end. He trusted that once they could have that simple conversation, it would all be cleared up. He was right. If the blow-up hadn't happened, Hannah would have been too curious to refuse to see him and demand an answer. It would have been fine. It's fine. It's more than fine. It's a happily ever after. For me, romance books are not about the ending. It's the path to get there because we know we're going to get the happily ever after. I just love the journey. Epilogue. I'm confident show fans would have loved this season, would have loved Hannah and Oscar at the end. Once Liza's story was abandoned for one that centered around the drama, to a greater story, epilogue. I am confident that Romancing the One fans would have loved this season of the show. Hannah and Oscar would quickly become their favorites. Once Liza's show or story was abandoned for one that centered around all of this drama of the producers bickering with Hannah, Katie's manipulation, Oscar being kicked off, but it's really fans would have eaten it up. We love drama. We love drama, especially when it has no impact on our lives because it's safe. This is why we read, we watch movies, why we want likable characters that we can see ourselves in, because it's the drama. We want to root for someone and we want it to be safe. Every time you complain that they're acting like middle schoolers in some review, you know who you are. But that's why you're here, because that's what we do. When drama happens, we transcend maturity into the most immature versions with the most knowledge, which is middle school. We have a lot of knowledge. We have a lot of hormone. We have no idea what we're doing. So we act that way when drama happens. Hannah knew she had to find the story. She and Eliza just disagreed on what that story was, but Hannah was right. And Hannah was right about Oscar. One of the points I wanted to make was that Hannah had plans for her life, but was flexible with them. She was fine being single and would live her life, but she happened to find a partner who gave her more options to get what she wanted. And she wanted to be an equal partner, the opposite of what her parents had. She happened to find that in a man she desired. I could have explored more, but that's what the short stories are for. So thank you for joining me of this commentary and annotations for Romancing Mr. Tilney. We have one more book in this series to do this for, and that won't be out until 2026. So if you're listening to this in 2026, it'll probably be about July. If you're listening to this well after it's all out, just go to the next video with commentary. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you for I Still Love You, citation needed.